Hi, this is Roland.
Hi, I'm Curt.
We're Tears for Fears.
And you're listening to Consequence.
Who's that ghost knocking at my door? You know that I can love you more.
It's been 17 years since your last LP, but the process on this has been quite long. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which we'll get into. What started out was a bunch of writing sessions. As you guys kind of geared towards putting out new music that didn't end up working for you. You called them speed dating sessions a lot. Mm-hmm. What about those sessions didn't click? And kind of when did you realize this isn't the direction for the next Tears for Fears record?
Well, I think that there was this huge move to try and get us to somehow be relevant to the today's market, which is probably different than a few years ago already. And so there wasn't really any sense of you guys go in the studio, do something great, and we'll release it. None of that whatsoever. It's you guys go into the studio, but we don't trust you. So we're going to put you with some guys who really have their finger on the pulse nowadays. So, and given that that was the mandate, I think we did a good job. We came up with some very catchy songs, which kind of almost sounded like, modern day pop music. But there was a whole series of events which allowed us or forced us to sort of look back at the material we have. And when we did that, Curt especially said, this is not the Tears for Fears album. This is one huge attempt to be successful in the singles market. Mm-hmm. And we are known, I suppose at the same time as this, we were getting the BBC's classic albums program. We were on that with Songs for the Big Chair, and all of a sudden you're looking at yourself going, hey, we made a classic album. That kind of, it pushes you into a different area of the music business. Right. And so when the dust settled and Curt and I got together, Curt we agreed on about 5 songs which we would rework, but then we started writing again together without the team of experts, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. And
that was really, we reclaimed who we were. We got ourselves back, and we decided we weren't going to try and do the hit single route at all. We were going to try and do something on the same level of Seeds of Love or Big Chair.
Right. Yeah, and actually a lot of that is reflected in one of the album tracks itself, Master Plan, which I have to assume came from the second round of writing sessions.
You're right.
Yeah. I don't know, Curt, could you talk about that song and what led to that coming about, and what
that was one of Roland's songs, but it is about, the whole process we had to go through and someone else having a master plan of what your career arc should be. But I concur with Roland in the sense that when we decided to make an album was when things changed. It was really going back to that. I think that, the previous sessions it was always in search of a hit song.
Right.
That was it. It wasn't in search of making a great album. It was in search of a hit song, and then the rest would be filler material.
Right.
And I don't think we've ever done that or ever been good at it. Mm-hmm. Normally our stuff comes from, our singles as such normally come from an album. I think that the wrong way of looking at it was trying to find an elusive modern track and try and when that came about, the rest would fall into place. Right. I think it's always for us the other way around. We make an album, and off of that, normally there is something that is commercial-ish.
So I'm wondering, once you realized, okay, this round table writing for a hit doesn't work, how does Tears for Fears get together and still do a modern pop album, but for us in 2020?
I think it was really what we weren't doing when in search of, this sort of the elusive hit single. What we weren't doing was talking about our lives. You know, what we weren't doing was sharing our experience, if you see what I'm saying.
Sure.
And so we were missing a whole lot of soul, if you see what I'm saying.
Of course. Yeah.
And so when Curt and I got together, having decided that we got about 5 songs, there was no noise. It was the two of us putting our heads together, that in a way that we hadn't done since we were kids, really. And I was very confident that something would come out of that, because we were at loggerheads for years. But it was really the coming together and the decision to make this record more balanced, more representative of the two of us, and not representative of other people's desires. Sure. And in all that, just by our natural, the application of taste that happens with Curt, fussy bastard that he is, you know, and myself, the application of our taste, and we get something that we both like, and that is Tears for Fears.
Sure. Yeah, I you know, I've read and heard from previous interviews that you guys really got together in a room with acoustic guitars and pretty much came out with No Small Thing.
Yep.
And I wish I was a fly, like I could be a fly in the wall and see both the conversation that led to you guys finally sitting down and just like the first 15 minutes of that session, because it's so interesting to me. Kind of the arc of your career as a band is super unique, in a way that I don't know, that it doesn't sound necessarily like it should be, but you went from, you know, massive breakout in the 80s to pretty much estranged during the 90s. You got back together, put out an album, and then had this 17-year gap, and then finally went back into a room together. So I'm just wondering if there's any way you could recall what sitting down together again for that first time with acoustic guitars and coming up with No Small Thing. What was that experience like?
I mean, we sat down. Well, we sat down with a couple of acoustic guitars and basically just kind of played, and bits stuck. You know, it's the sort of same as any kind of songwriting you do, where, you know, the bits that stick in your head are normally the bits you end up using. But for me, I think that, you know, a Tears for Fears record is made when we both agree on stuff. You know, I mean, that's just the nature of it. Prior to that, we were kind of going off in different directions, I think. And I don't think what we ended up with after all those sort of writing sessions really was representative of us. And I mean us, the both of us. And it wasn't really telling a story either. It wasn't personal enough, I didn't think, most of it. It didn't have an arc and a storyline to even the album. It didn't have highs, it didn't have lows. It was just, here's an attempt at a hit, here's an attempt at a hit, here's an attempt at something modern, here's, you know, and it was just so in your face and trying so hard that it really didn't breathe at all. It didn't give you a chance to think about what these songs are about where these people might be at now, or about their lives right now. It didn't tell you any of that, because it didn't give you a chance to actually enter into it.
Yeah.
It just shouted at you for about 40 minutes. And it wasn't until we sat down and we worked out the 5 songs that we kept, that, yeah, we both like those songs. Whether we 100% liked the recording didn't matter at that point in time. You know, we had a belief in those songs, and they told a story, and they meant something to both of us, and then we took it from there. But I think it was more the sort of deciding that we had to finish it. And once we decided we had to finish it, and we knew we had to finish it ourselves without, you know, outside business input,
Sure.
then it became easier.
Yeah.
You know, the process was actually easy once we got to that point.
Was it familiarly easy? Because, you know, it's no big secret that there's been a history of disagreement to some extent between you two. What was it, you know, 17 years since your last album, you know, and with all of the things that were pulling you apart during the making of this album, what was it easier when you sat down and both looked at each other and said, I don't agree on this, I don't agree on this either, we got to go this other direction?
Yeah, I think so.
Go on.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's definitely easier once it becomes, I mean, I think the hard thing and the biggest, you know, and I think the biggest mistake that our ex-manager made, and, you know, we can harp on about the writing sessions and writing with songwriters du jour. In a weird way, I don't think that was the biggest problem. I think the biggest problem was interjecting himself between the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a bigger problem. And I think him trying to solve any differences we had was a bigger problem than allowing us to solve them ourselves. I think we're too, you know, old for that. I don't think there's necessarily animosity. You know, what happens is we either can agree on something musically or we can't. And if we can't, then we shouldn't work together. I mean, it's not kind of brain surgery. There's nothing, you know, kind of weird about that, I don't think. I always find it strange that people presume that there's sort of big arguments, but there really aren't. I mean, it's either we're enjoying working together or we're not, or we both like what we're doing musically or we don't. Mm-hmm. You know, it's kind of, it sounds a little simplistic, but in the end, that's what it comes down to. If we can both agree on things, then we end up with something that's pretty great normally.
Right.
When we've both concurred that we like it, you know, yeah. And that's what happened in the end. You know, we finished this album, we both loved it at the end of it. Can't really ask for more than that.
Well, I'll tell you, I love it too. Like I said, I've been listening to it for a couple of days straight now, and it is filled with wonderful moments and really just lovely tracks. The title track itself, The Tipping Point, I think it's one of like the most powerful, we're going to call it, you know, a comeback single that I've heard in a while. It hits hard and it's super meaningful. Now, what's interesting about it to me, and you were talking about how like it filling your songs with souls, things that actually meant something to you as individuals. The Tipping Point has a very deeply personal and sorrowful meaning to Roland in particular. When I first heard it, not knowing that, it just registered as a very 2021 song. It felt very much of the time. Now, obviously, it was written around the passing of your first wife in 2017. I guess my question about it is such a powerful track, but it is so I'd imagine from a songwriting perspective, sorrowful and hard to do. What was the decision like to drop that as the lead single, knowing that it's something you're going to have to revisit over and over again?
Well, that's a good question, because that wasn't going to be the first single. The record company, or rather the radio department, had decided on a song called End of Night, which is probably, I mean, it's obviously very catchy and it's up and it's bouncy and it's not very difficult to get on the radio probably. But I think Curt and I felt that, you know, it's our job to go out and sell this thing. We got to talk about the album. We got to talk about everything. And we're coming out with a song, which was probably the oldest song on the record. Mm-hmm. I felt that, I mean, this is the crazy thing that our ex-manager used to say is, well, you know, what's the point of doing an album? Where's the narrative? He said, where's the narrative? For fuck's sake, excuse my language. What's the narrative? Hello. And so we chose that song, apart from because we absolutely loved it. We've always loved it since its birth. We felt that was Tears for Fears doing what they do best, and being emotionally honest about a very difficult situation. Mm-hmm. It's what we did in the early days on The Hurting, you know, which was more about childhood trauma and the mental, you know, fragility that comes from, you know, not a very solid childhood.
Mm-hmm.
We wrote about all those things, and yet with watching my wife suffer from, you know, mental issues and alcoholism, you know, you're really going back to square one. You're really going back to a vulnerability which you've only really experienced as a child. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
A helplessness that you only experienced as a child. So we all of a sudden came full circle with the tipping point. And I've always said that The Hurting was the only true Tears for Fears album, and then we kind of, you know, distilled the whole thing and made it big and commercial.
Sure.
But now I almost feel, you know, all this time later, we have an album which bookends our work, you know, The Hurting and The Tipping Point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a powerful bookend. I kind of do agree. It is, you know, like Curt was saying earlier, it really has a story and a structure to it that flows really, really beautifully. And it has such a range of songs on it. Like, for example, what's it, My Demons, which sounds like it was probably from the original sessions, which is like this big banger, moves into Rivers of Mercy, which might be my favorite song on the album, if not top 2 or 3. And that's this really serene, stunning kind of ode to the last year or two.
Yeah.
I find what's interesting about that song is that a lot of songs that came out of this time were, you know, galvanizing and rebellious and like fighting for rights and all that stuff. And this took a moment and paused and got a little more, I keep using the word serene, but a little more peace, like searching for peace out of it. Curt, maybe you can talk about where that song comes from, Rivers of Mercy. And
well, I think, yeah, I mean, again, it's one of Roland's, but it's, well, he wrote it around a backing track that Charlton Patterson, Doug Petty, who play with us live, did. But again, it's all about a journey on an album. I mean, if I could touch on the last point about the choice of first single as well.
Of course.
You know, the thing about End of Night, it is a bright and breezy, relatively superficial pop song. I mean, you know, relatively compared to the rest of the album. And it has its place, and where it comes on the album, I love. And when it comes along, when I'm listening to the album, I love the track. And it used to be one of my least favorite ones, but I love where it is because it gives me that release of just, okay, this is just nice. It's bright, it's breezy, it's where I need to be right now. And I think that Rivers of Mercy has the same effect after My Demons. So it's interesting when you get to that kind of curve on a record where, you know, half the reason this song sounds so great is because of where it comes.
Yeah.
You know, My Demons does the same, I think, you know, out of Break the Man. I think My Demons has the same effect.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Rivers of Mercy it's that serene moment of, or at least that attempting to find serenity more than anything else.
You just mentioned Break the Man, which is the next single, which I believe will be out by the time this interview gets published. To me, that song seems like I don't know about a sequel or follow-up, but it follows the same line of Woman in Chains, some 30 years later. And, you know, it's fascinating that, you know, we can talk for hours about why do we still need to write about this, but what about writing about, you know, the need for equality in terms of gender and in the 2020s versus when you wrote about it in the 80s?
Well, yeah, I think that's the case with a lot of the subject matter. You know, it's unfortunate that you're still writing about it to a certain degree. Although, excuse me, I think we're inching closer and closer, you know, but a little too slow for my liking. Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily a modern version of Woman in Chains. It's the same kind of subject matter, but it's really more about a desire to give women more power, as opposed to, you know, stop abusing them. You know, stop abusing them would be the first step.
Right.
Giving them more power would be the next step.
Yeah, Woman in Chains was really about domestic abuse.
Uh-huh.
It's quite simple. It's a personal story of the way my father treated my mother, who was an erotic dancer, shall we say, just like the video. And she would go out and do the gigs and come back, and my father would accuse her of infidelity, even though he was enthusiastic about her going out and showing off her body.
Wow.
And then he would beat her up. So that's what that song was about. Break the Man definitely is a pro-woman song, but it's more political, as Curt described. So for me, if you put Woman in Chains, married it together with Everybody Wants to Rule the World, you've got Break the Man.
There you go.
You know, it's a weird kind of, joining of two different.
What's it like releasing music for audiences that may have, like me, discovered you through things like Disturbed or Donnie Darko or these other covers that have come out? And then you also have, Kanye and Drake and The Weeknd are sampling you. You've got Lord and Weezer covering you. And then you delivered those knockout, seriously, some of my favorite all-time covers of Arcade Fire and Animal Collective. Those songs are like still on party playlists for me. I love those tracks. Why do you think your music keeps coming back? Why does it keep being able to be refreshed for every new generation? And what's it like to constantly be being reintroduced to younger audiences, like via bands like this?
Well, it's immensely gratifying. But I think that, I've always thought that if you do work that has some depth, meaning, and quality, then it's going to stick around for a while. It could go out of fashion for a bit and then come back in fashion. But, if it was something that stood out at the time, and I think, that's another point is instead of going about, which we did, trying to work out how we could fit in now, it's more a question of how do you stand out now, and doing what we do naturally is how we stand out. And so, it seems like a ridiculous, now looking back on it, like, why were we even thinking that? But, that's, you come to that realization eventually that the reason we stuck around is because we stood out. And I think that this album, for me, certainly listening to it, doesn't necessarily fit in right now, but I think it stands out as something of quality.
I think there's definitely moments on it for sure that fit in right now, at least thematically. If not sonically, it's still very much an original Tears for Fears.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole COVID lockdown thing, without question, has left a big imprint on everyone. And so therefore that you will see a lot of people singing about the same thing. And that's where we kind of merge with the market, if you see what I'm saying. We certainly interact with the culture at the time, and so we're not working on a desert island somewhere.
Sure. And what's interesting too is that, speaking of the pandemic, Mad World kind of had another little resurgence last year, thanks in part to Curt's cover with his daughter, and then Brandi Carlile did a really powerful cover of it during a live stream that had a little bit of virality to it. It's wild to me that Mad World is on a 20-year cycle. Like every 20 years, it has a resurgence. It came out in 82. Donnie Darko was 2022. And now you've got, the pandemic revival of Mad World.
Yeah.
Well, there's probably a cosmic cycle which we're aligned with. I know what it is, but I'm going to sound like a nutter if I start talking about that stuff. But yes, the 20-year cycle of Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions. Yes.